Thank you for listening to the Chronicles of Christendom, a survey of medieval literature, by me, Mom Chilo. This podcast is dedicated to bringing light to medieval stories and viewing them from a traditional Christian perspective. I hope you enjoy this episode. We're going to go over a Dutch vernacular poem called Reynaert the Fox. So, as always, I'll give a little bit of a brief background. So, this was written in the language that's known as Middle Dutch, and it has a specific sort of a East Flemish dialect to it, as well as a lot of the place names come from like the East Flanders region. So that's why we think that the person who wrote this is from East Flanders, and he writes with a very distinct East Flemish dialect. And the man who wrote this, he just calls himself in this poem Willem, or specifically he calls himself Willem who made Madocke, which is a reference to another work. But we don't have that other work. In fact, this is really the only work that we have by this Willem fellow. And Willem probably wrote this around 1260. Now, in terms of genre, this is what's known as a beast epic, and it has all these talking animals in it who are, like, in some sense very human, like they're subject to laws, both laws of the state and laws of the church. Like they go to church, go to confession, they can receive communion, things like that. But they also retain some of their unique features as well, and some of their unique features as animals, like the way they live, the way they walk and travel, play a role in the story, as we'll see. And this genre of beast epics is actually quite a common genre in the medieval era, especially in France. And there's a sort of like a cast of canon characters that tend to act in certain ways. It's kind of like something like Arthurian literature, where you have, say, King Arthur, and people write about King Arthur all over Europe, and he has specific tendencies, but they kind of play around with it a little bit. Or, Gawain, Percival, Lancelot, right? Their names might change a little bit, but it's the same character, and they tend to have some of the same defining features about them. So it's the same way with these beast epics. And there's also, just like with Arthurian literature, probably also a huge oral tradition that we just don't know anything about just because it's not written down anywhere. And I won't go too into this, but the origin of these beast epics probably originates from animal fables, specifically from like Aesop's fables, and then later it gets taken up in Latin literature, and then eventually they become these epics in the vernacular. So when I say a fable versus an epic, the fables they tend to be shorter, they tend to be much more clear-cut in terms of like the moral lesson they're trying to teach you, while in the epics, they aren't so like clear-cut like pedagogical tools. They're a lot more, there's a lot more nuance, and there's not a clear lesson per se. And we'll see that as we go into the story. So this story, Reynaert the Fox, it's very much based off of the sort of tradition of the romance of Reynard the Fox, which stems from the French tradition, and it got translated into Dutch, and that's probably where Willem is writing from. He's not like copying things per se, but he's kind of making his own spin on the story. And if you want to like study this text more academically, you can find various ways that Willem uses the older tradition, the tradition that's come before him, and incorporates various parts into his story. And at sometimes he almost assumes the reader knows these other references as well. And the last prefatory comment I'll make is that I'm using a verse translation. So this is written as a poem, and instead of reading a prose translation where they translate it into paragraphs, I'll be reading a verse translation, and I'll put the details about that in the description where you can find it or buy it. All right, let's jump in now. So I'm going to just read from the very beginning. I'll read Willem's prologue of the story. So he says, Willem, who made Madocke, which often kept him awake, was so extremely annoyed that the tales of Reynaert, which Arnaud has not finished, remained unwritten in Dutch, that he had the life looked for, and following the Dutch books, he began it in Dutch as follows. May God favor us with his help. So here, Willem references somebody else who tried to write a sort of one of these beast epics of Reynaert in Dutch, but he didn't finish it. So Willem is saying that he's starting to write his own. And for a while, people kind of debated about, okay, well, does that mean that the first half of this is written by Arnaud and then later by Willem? but I think the general consensus now is that Willem wrote all of this, but that there was this other guy named Arnaud who tried writing something, didn't finish it, and then Willem starts from scratch a new story. I'll continue reading. So, now I am of a mind to urge at this beginning both peasants and fools, whenever they happen to hear the rhyme and these words, which are wasted on them, that they leave them unchanged. They too much resemble the raven, who always thinks he knows it all. They claim that many verses are untrue, which they know no more about than I know what the people are called who now live in Babylon. If they were sensible, they would give up. I am not saying this for myself. I would not have written this poem if a certain lady had not asked me, who likes to conduct her affairs in a very courtly manner. She asked me to make this story about Reynaert. Although I denounce the nitpickers and the peasants and the fools, I wish it to be heard by those who like to act honorably and put their minds to living in a courtly way, whether they be poor or rich, and who will understand it properly. Now hear how I begin. So this is a pretty common medieval preface where you basically say something to the effect of, I'm telling this story, a lot of people have gotten it wrong, but a very courtly person asked me to write this story, so I'm now going to write this story in the correct way. And this could be satire, because as we'll see, this whole sort of story is very satire. Did he really have a courtly lady who asked him to write this poem? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he's just making that up as part of the satire. We don't really know. And then as well as he's making fun of like the common people for misunderstanding the story and saying that they know about the story better. And he's probably implying like the oral tradition around Reynaert and around these sort of beast epics. And they say, well, no, actually the tradition is this, this, and that, not what you're saying. So anyways, we'll get into the story now. It was on a day at Whitsuntide when trees and shrubbery alike were all dressed all over with green leaves. So Whitsuntide means the Pentecost season. Noble the king had had his court proclaimed everywhere, which he thought, all being well, would greatly increase his fame. Then came to the king's court all the animals, large and small, except for Reynaert the Fox alone. He had behaved so badly at court that he did not dare go. Whoever is knowingly guilty is afraid. This was the case with Reynaert, and that is why he avoided the king's court, where his esteem was low. When the entire court had gathered, there was nobody except the badger, who did not have some reason for complaining of Reynaert the scoundrel with the grey beard. This story starts the way a lot of Arthurian literature starts, which is King Arthur holding court at Pentecost or during Easter or sometime some major holiday, and he gathers all of his court, and then something kind of bad happens or some sort of drama unfolds at the court that has to be solved. So this story is kind of taking some of those tropes, as well as we'll see that this king's name is Noble, but we'll see that he's not actually very noble, and that's part of the satire. And then we also learn of Reynaert the Fox. So like our modern sort of understanding or tropes around foxes being sly, cunning, sneaky, kind of evil, mischievous, there's the same sort of conception of foxes here, and that's very much the sort of character that Reynaert is. And that's why he doesn't go to court, because he's wronged all these people, and he's scared that if he goes to court, he's going to be tried at the court. And that's essentially what happens. So all of these animals are making complaints to King Noble against Reynaert. So one, for instance, says that, he slept with my wife, or he raped my wife. Other people accuse him of stealing. They bring up instances in which he killed other animals when he wasn't supposed to. Just all this sort of bad stuff. People make these long complaints against the king, to the king against Reynaert. And the only person who defends him after all of these complaints have been made is his quote unquote nephew, which it's not clear what these like terms like nephew, uncle, niece, like we'll see a couple of these terms come up, but it's not clear if they mean like strict like genetic descent, so to speak, because obviously like a badger is different than a fox, or if it's more so like a term of endearment, or to like say that we're friends or very close or family in like some other way. But anyways, Grimbeard the Badger, who is called Reynaert's nephew, is the only person who defends Reynaert. So this is what the Badger says. Lord Ysingringe, so this is the wolf who has accused Reynaert of raping his wife. So Lord Ysingringe, as everyone surely knows, and it is an old saying, sweet words rarely fall from the enemy's mouth. Listen, pay attention to my words. I would wish that the one who has caused the other most grief were hanged by the neck from a tree like a thief. Lord Ysingringe, should you wish to agree to a settlement, I will be pleased to assist. My uncle, Reynaert, will not make objections either, and whoever is the worst miscreant, whether it be my uncle or you, he will owe the other party compensation. Even though he is not now appearing to make a complaint, if my uncle's standing at court was high, and if he enjoyed the king's favor, as you do, Lord Ysingringe, the king would not approve of it, and you would not escape punishment this time, for having ravaged his skin so often with your sharp teeth, while he had no way of taking revenge. So Grimbeard the Badger here is kind of making a counterclaim on behalf of his uncle, Reynaert. So this is very similar in terms of like court structure, or maybe not too similar, but there's some similarities with what we saw in our last episode with the Ear Dweller saga, that Icelandic saga, where a lot of the drama centers around like the court, or like, these trials, these lawsuits that get brought up. So in the medieval times, you didn't really have like a criminal law system as we understand it now in modern times. It was mostly just like lawsuits. Like you had to, make a lawsuit against somebody who did a crime, and then it was handled that way. That's not always the case, but that's often how it was, and that's what we see here as well. So going back to the story, the badger and the wolf keep arguing with each other back and forth, and eventually, for instance, the badger, Grimbeard, tells Ysingringe, the wolf, that his wife actually wanted Reynaert and wasn't actually raped, and that, the things that Reynaert actually has done wrong, that he's actually living as a penitent hermit, who has like a hair shirt that he wears as part of his penitence. And in some of the other stories, some of these other beast epics revolving around Reynaert, the wolf's wife that he has relations with, normally there's two incidents. So one is a consensual incident, and then a later one where it is a not so consensual incident. So it looks like the author is kind of playing around with both of those incidences, and each animal is able to present the incidents, or we know which one that he wants to in order to better support his case. Some more complaints are made against Reynaert, including murder, and the king eventually decides to summon Reynaert in order to hold trial. So he sends Bruin, the bear, to go to his dwelling and summon him. So according to medieval law, and this gets brought up actually in the story itself, you can be summoned once, then twice, and then 3 times. But if you don't show up on the 3rd time, then you are declared an outlaw, and basically people can just like kill you. So what we see here is the first summons by Bruin the bear. So let me read from the story here. It says, "Now Bruin is on his way, and he considers it unlikely in his heart, and it seemed to him absurd that anyone would be so wicked, and that Reynaert would disgrace him. Through the darkness of a forest, he made his way through a wasteland, where Reynaert had made his tracks, crooked and manifold, each time when he had left the forest to go hunting. On the other side of the wasteland was a mountain high and broad. Bruin had to make his way across it in the middle to reach Manerputus. Reynaert had very many residences, but the castle of Manerputus was the best of his strongholds. That is where he went when he was afraid and found himself in dire straits. Now Bruin has walked so far that he has arrived at Manerputus, where he spotted the gate, where Reynaert customarily went out. Then, in front of the barbican, he sat down on his tail, and said, 'Are you at home, Reynaert? It's me, Bruin, the messenger of the king, who has sworn this oath by his God, if you do not come to the trial, and if I fail to bring you with me to subject yourself to the law, and to live in peace in the future, he shall have you broken on the wheel. Reynaert, do as I advise, and come with me to court.' Reynaert has already concocted a plan about how he's going to get away by killing Bruin, but his plan requires that he gets some trust from Bruin first. So he greets him with a lot of flattery, like these people know who they are. So he greets him with a lot of flattery and says, 'Hi, welcome,' all this good stuff. And then Reynaert drops the fact that he hasn't come to court, or that he didn't go to court when the king originally held his court, because he had eaten too much honey. And that was the only source of food that he had, and he was forced to eat it, but he didn't like it, and it upset his stomach, and that's why he didn't go to court. So after some talking, Reynaert says, Brune, would you like some of it? If you want to eat honey, on your word of honor, let me know. If you want some, I can make you eat your fill. I shall give you so much that 10 of you would not be able to eat it if in that way I would earn your loyal support. And then Brune says, 10 of us? How can that be, Reynaert? Say no more about this. And know for certain and a fact, if I had all the honey between here and Portugal, I would eat it all up in one go. Reynaert said, Brune, what's that you're saying? A villager who is called Lamfruit lives near here, and he has so much honey, truly, that you could not eat it even in 7 years. I would put it at your disposal, provided, Lord Brune, that you are prepared to take my side and plead for me at court. Then Brune solemnly promised, and assured Reynaert that if the latter was prepared to stuff him with honey, of which he will hardly have a taste, he would be willing, in all circumstances, to prove a loyal friend and a good companion. So already in this little passage, we have some foreshadowing here. So it says the honey of which Brune will hardly have a taste. So the story is letting us know up front that there's going to be some trickery going about. And instead of having the suspense being in not knowing what's going to happen, the suspense is more so located in how the story unfolds. Like it basically tells you how the story ends. And especially, these stories of Reynaert, there's all these oral tales and there's all this written stuff as well, where you basically know what's going to happen. You know how he's going to react. But the suspense, rather than being like a surprise of what's going to happen, it's more so in the intrigue of how does it happen? Not what, but how is it going to take place? It's also quite revealing of Reynaert's character that in order to set this trap on Brune, he can't just say, hey, I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart, because Brune knows that Reynaert is not that sort of person to do something out of the good of his heart. So instead, Reynaert has to say, look, man, I am tricking you to an extent. However, I am bribing you. So if you accept my bribe, then you'll get this good thing, and then you just support me at court. But we'll see that Reynaert actually has a different plan in mind. But it's interesting to note that in order for Reynaert to concoct his more sinister plan, he knows that it will be seen as too much of a break in character if he just tries to be like a good person or like a good fox. So anyways, Brune accepts. So as a bear, he loves honey. He says, yes, I'll eat the honey. I'll take the honey and then I'll help you in court. So Reynaert directs them to go to Lamfruit's house. And over at his house, or like his estate, he tells them there's honey in this tree hole. So he takes them to the tree where there's like this hole in it with all the honey. And then Reynaert basically goads Brune into putting his head in there. And then Brune gets stuck about halfway through with his paws also in the tree. And then while Brune is kind of scrambling around asking for help, Reynaert sees Lamfruit coming. So that's like the farmer there. And he just leaves Brune stuck in there. And then Lamfruit, who's like he's like a human, and he sees this bear in his tree. It's like, what is going on? So he gathers the entire village, and even his wife comes to try and kill Brune. And it is significant to note that he has a wife, because we later learn that Lamfruit is a priest, and he also has children, as we'll later learn as well. And during this time, there was no, in the West at least, there was no, priest marrying. So that's an element of satire, as we'll see. So Brune is able to, painfully escape, but he loses much of his skin, and he loses one of his ears as well. And then, when he gets out, he's, recovering from his injuries, and he sees this entire village coming after him. It was on the bank of a river that Brune, most miserable of all the animals, was surrounded by many villagers. Little was said at the time. Great discomfort was in store for him. Some hit him, others stabbed him. Some hit him, others threw things at him. Lamfruit caused him the sharpest pain. Lotrum Lansvoet, as one man was called, carried a stick with the horn cladding, which he constantly aimed at his eye. Lady Volmarte wielded a stick until the pain made him piss himself. Albuquerque and my lady Bave both lay on the ground, and together fought for one of his balls. Ludmore, with his long nose, was carrying a lead ball on a cord, and was swinging it around. Ludolf, with the crooked fingers, set an example to all of them, for he was of the highest birth, with the sole exception of Lamfruit. Hewlin, with his crooked leg, was his father, as is well known, and was born in Apstale. And he was the son of Lady O'Gurn, who mended lanterns for a living. Other men and women, more than that I can name, caused Brune great distress, so much that he lost much blood. Brune was on the receiving end from every side. The priest brought down the staff and crucifix ceaselessly upon him, blow upon blow, and the verger with the banner attacked him with gusto. Lamfreut approached at that moment with a sharp axe, and he hit him between neck and head. Brune was so dazed that he jumped aside because of the blow, between the river and the hedge, into the middle of a group of old women, and pushed 5 of them into the river that ran there, and that was quite wide and deep. The priest's wife was one of them. That little pleased the priest. When he saw his wife in the river, he was no longer interested in stabbing or hitting Brune. He shouted, "Look, worthy parishioners, there floats Lady Jullock, with her spindle and her distaff. Whoever can help her, go. I will give him for a year and a day a full pardon and absolution for all his sinful actions." Man and wife both left the miserable creature Brune lying there for dead, and went where the priest told them, to go with ropes and with hooks while they pulled the woman out. Brune reached the river and quickly swam away from them all. So we see quite a comedic scene, as you can tell. And just one note I want to make about the priest's wife. So her name is Lady Jullock, and that literally translates to "you I tempt." So Brune floats down the river to escape, and as he's floating, Reynaert sees him. He makes fun of him. He laughs at him, but he realizes that he's failed. That Brune is going to go back into the court, and they're going to send someone else to summon him. And he knows about his 3 summons too. Like he's not stupid. So when Brune comes to court, and it said that because of the skin that was cut off of him, it's painful for him to walk, so he has to roll to court. So when Brune ends up rolling to court, he explains what happened. And then the king sends the cat named Tybert. And Tybert doesn't want to go. He's kind of scared of Reynaert, and he saw what happened to Brune. He's like, why should I have to do that? But eventually he goes, and as he's going, he sees this bad omen involving this bird. And then he goes up to Reynaert and, tries to talk to him, but Reynaert concocts a similar plan, and he tells Tybert the cat about a nearby barn that the priest owns with innumerable mice that he can eat. So Reynaert tempts the bear with honey, and now he's going to try to pull a ruse on the cat with mice. And Tybert takes this bait, and they go off to try and find his mice. Then they set out on their journey, Tybert and his uncle Reynaert, and ran where they wanted to run with unbridled speed until they reached the priest's barn, which had been enclosed all around with an earthen wall, which Reynaert had broken into the day before when the priest had lost a cock, which the fox had taken from him. For this reason, the priest's son, Martinet, so note that the priest has a son. Not only does he have a wife, but also a son, right? So that's further indication he's not a really good priest. So his son, the priest's son, Martinet, was fuming and irate, and before the hole he had, set a snare to catch the fox. So badly did he want to avenge the cock. Reynaert, that evil animal, knew this, and said, "Nephew Tybert, crawl through this hole here. Don't dawdle or be slow. Grab everything about and around you. Hear how the mice are squeaking. Come outside again when you've had enough, and I shall stay by this hole, and shall wait for you here outside. We must stay together tonight. Tomorrow we will go to court. Tybert, take care not to be slow. Go and eat, and let us return to my hospitable dwelling, as is fitting. My wife will receive us gladly. Should I go in through this hole? What do you say, Reynaert? Is this your advice? Priests are cunning. I don't like to cross them. Oh, dear Tybert, why are you such a coward? What caused this change of heart?" Tybert was ashamed of himself, and jumped into a place where he experienced great misery, because before he knew it, a snare was very tight around his neck. In this way, Reynaert deceived his guest. So because of some earlier shenanigans that Reynaert was up to with regards to the priest's home, he knew that the priest had set a snare in order to catch Reynaert, but then Reynaert is able to flip that on Tybert, and he gets him ensnared instead. So Tybert starts screaming once he's ensnared, and Reynaert starts making fun of him, but the priest's son awakes because of the screaming, and then he awakens his father and his mother, and they go out to kill the chicken thief. Or at least what they perceive to be the chicken thief. The priest himself, not wishing to stay behind, left his bed as naked as the day he was born. Martinet had reached Tibur and shouted, "He is here!" The priest jumped towards the fire and grabbed his wife's distaff. Lady Jullock took a church candle and hastily lit it. The priest went towards Tibur and started to hit him with the distaff. Then Tibur had to accept many blows in a short time. The priest stood, as all could see, completely naked and, blow upon blow, hit Tibur lying before him. Nobody spared themselves there. Martinet picked up a stone and threw it at Tibur, which cost him an eye. The priest stood dressed only in his skin and raised his arms for a mighty blow. When Tibur realized he was sure to die, he summoned the little courage he had, which led to dishonor for the priest. With both his claws and his teeth did he injure him, as was obvious, and jumped up between the priest's legs, and the purse that has no seam with which the bells are rung, the thing fell down onto the floor. The wife was distressed and swore by her father's soul that she would gladly have given the alms of an entire year for the priest not to have suffered this sorrow and this shame. So there's a couple of things I want to comment on here. So the first one is that the priest and his wife. So the priest grabs his wife's distaff. So a distaff is something you use for like a weaving, and it's like a woman's job, So it's he takes up the feminine object. Whereas Lady Jullock, she takes up the church candle. So there's a little bit of like a feminine and masculine role reversal here. And then again, we have some like how do I put this lightly? Testicle jokes where like last time we saw that the testicles of the bear fell off, but now the priest has his fall off, and the priest's wife is very upset. And Reynaert makes a joke about this. He says, "Be silent, Jullock, dear lady, and restrain these lamentations, and put a stop to your distress. What does it matter that your lord has lost one of his clappers? The less he will need to exert himself. Be quiet about this. If the priest recovers, it will be no dishonor that he rings with one bell." And then Reynaert heads back home, but meanwhile Tibur is able to escape with all the commotion, and he goes back to the king. And then while at the court, Grimbeard the Badger defends Reynaert, and because he defends Reynaert, the king says, "Okay, if you think he's this good, then you go and summon him." So Grimbeard is forced to go to Reynaert, and remember now this is the third summons. So if he fails to come to this third summons to court, then he will be declared an outlaw. So Grimbeard goes to Reynaert, and this is what he tells him. "Are you not worried about your present uncertain legal position? Don't you think it time yet, Uncle Reynaert, to go on your way to the king's court, where serious accusations are made against you? You have been summoned 3 times. If you fail to appear tomorrow, I fear that you will not find any mercy anymore. On the 3rd day, you will find your castle Manipertus stormed. You will see in front of your house a gallows or wheels erected. I assure you of this. Both your children and your wife will most certainly lose their lives in a dishonorable way. You will not escape yourself. Therefore, your best advice is to come with me to court. It is uncertain how it will end. You have many a day have had stranger things happen to you than leaving acquitted of all accusations. The court tomorrow with the king's approval." So Grimbeard is he's like, "Hey, Reynaert, just come to the court because it's going to be a lot easier on you. And a lot of weird things have happened in your life, so I don't really doubt that you will be able to escape from this conundrum." And Reynaert actually seems to agree, but before they go off, he makes a sort of like confession to Grimbeard that's pretty insincere. He makes a lot of jokes about sleeping with like someone's wife, for instance. And then Grimbeard gives him 40 lashings with a twig, as if Grimbeard was like giving him some sort of penance. And then before they head to the king's court, Reynaert uses the time to steal a hen right after he makes confession. And Grimbeard's like, "Didn't you say that you're going to like clean up your way of life now?" And then Reynaert's like, "Oh yeah, sorry, my bad." So they eventually arrive at the court, and this is what the poem says. "When it became known at the king's court that Reynaert had arrived at court with Grimbeard the Badger, I reckoned there was no one, however poor or of inferior family, who did not prepare himself for a complaint. All this was aimed at Reynaert. Nevertheless, he acted as if he had nothing to fear, whatever his real feelings, and he said to Grimbeard the Badger, 'Lead us along the high street.' Reynaert presented an attitude in such bold behavior that it looked as if he were the king's son and had done nothing wrong at all. Boldly, he took up his position in front of Nobel the king and said, God, who has created everything, may he give you, Lord King, enduring joy and honor. I greet you, King, as is only right. Never did a king have a servant as loyal towards him as I am and have ever been. This has often become clear. Yet some of those who are here would with pleasure rob me of your favor if you are willing to believe them. But no, not you. God reward you. It is not fitting for crowned heads to put credence too lightly in tales told by false counselors and villains. Yet I wish to complain of this to God. There are in this day and age too many plotters capable of making false accusations who now have gained the upper hand everywhere at powerful courts. They should not be believed. Villainy is their nature. As a result, they cause all good people distress. May God revenge it upon their lives, and may he give them in eternity such reward as they deserve. The king said, Woe upon you, Reynaert! Woe, Reynaert, foul piece of evil! What a fine front you put on! That will not help you one bit now. Stop your flattery now. Flattery won't make me your friend. The truth is that you should have served me concerning a certain affair in the wood, whereas you did not keep to the peace that I had proclaimed. So when Reynaert enters the court, he's very bold, very almost brash, you could say, and he's trying to flatter the king, but the king isn't having any of it. And then several animals come up and make their complaints. So the first we learn is Balin the ram. So it says, Balin the ram jumped up, and his ewe that accompanied him, that was Lady Howie. Balin said, Let all of us present our charges. Bruin jumped up with his relatives, and nasty Tibur, and Ysengringe his companion, Fortendent the boar, and Ticelin the raven, Panzer the beaver, as well as Brunil the bittern, that shapeless bag, and the squirrel, Lord Roussel, the weasel, my lady Fine, Chanticleer and his children wildly flapped their wings. The fair Clini Bijac, they all joined the crowd. All of them took up their positions before their lord the king, and had Reynaert taken prisoner. Now, the pleading started there. Never did anyone hear animals utter such eloquent words as they did here. In the case between Reynaert and all the other animals, as witnessed by those who heard it, if I had to report the speeches and the words that were present there, it would be difficult and troublesome for me. So after all these animals make their complaint and things are looking pretty grim for Reynaert, Reynaert asked to be able to give a public confession, and the king lets him. So the story says, Reynaert stood there, a picture of misery, and looked all around him. Then he spoke, clearly audible. Help me, said he, Dominus. Now, there is no one here in this place, neither friend nor foe, whom I have not wronged in one way or another. Nevertheless, listen all of you, my lords. Let it be clear to you how I, Reynaert, poor creature, first began my wicked ways. At all times, night and day, I was a well-behaved child. When I was weaned from the breast, I went to play with the lambs, so as to hear them bleat, until I bit one to death. For the first time I lapped up the blood. It tasted so good, it was so nice, that I also tried the flesh. That taught me to appreciate good food, so much that I went to the goats in the woods where I heard them bleating. Then I bit to death 2 kids. This I also did on the 3rd day, and I became ever bolder and braver, and killed ducks and chickens and geese wherever I came across them. When I had developed a taste for blood, I became so fierce and cruel that I bit to death everything I met, and that I thought would agree with me and that I could handle. So he's giving this confession. He kind of goes on and on and on. It's interesting. When he first entered the court, he was like, look, all these people are lying and saying, bad things against me because they're villains themselves. But then now he's like, okay, maybe there's something to their complaints. But then he kind of has an excuse prepared. But he has a way he's going to get out of this. So he's going to play on the king's greed, much like he played on the gluttony of Tibert and Brune. So after talking for a while, he says this, King, this I want you to know. I still have silver and gold that is entirely at my disposal, in such great quantities that a cart going 7 times round would barely be able to transport it. When the king heard this, he gave Reynaert a sharp answer. Reynaert, how did you come by this treasure? Reynaert answered, I'll tell you about it, if you wish to know what I know. Neither for love nor for hate shall it remain hidden. King, that treasure was stolen. But if it had not been stolen, it would have been used for the murderous attack on your life. On my word of honor, that would greatly grieve all of your friends." The queen became upset and said, "Alas, my dear Reynard! Alas, Reynard! Alas, alas! Alas, Reynard, what are you saying? I urge you by nothing less than the journey that your soul will undertake, that you tell us this instant, Reynard, the whole truth, publicly, and inform us if you know of any attempt at murder or of a plan with intent to murder that concerns my husband. Let us now hear it in the assembly." Now hear how Reynard will delude the king and queen, and how in an ingenious way he will gain the king's friendship and favor, and how he, through no fault of his own, will cause Brune and Ysengringe both great difficulties, and how he will create hardship for them and a feud with the king. These lords, they were now very proud because they thought to have brewed Reynard some beer to his disgrace. However, I truly believe that he in his turn will brew them mead, that they will drink to their shame. So again, we have this trope, like a very medieval trope of where you, in a sense, tell the audience what is going to happen, and then you build suspense in the way it happens, not in like surprises or plot twist or something of that nature. And Reynard is going to basically throw his own father and the only person who's been loyal to him, Grimbeard, under the bus in order to save his own skin. And this is a very like sociopathic tendency some people or some sociopaths have, where they'll admit something embarrassing that may or may not be true, but they'll say something embarrassing and then say something else that follows it, because psychologically you're thinking, well, if they just told me this embarrassing thing about them, then the other thing they said must also be true. So that's kind of how Reynard is operating here. So the king tells everyone to shut up and to listen to Reynard. And this is the story that Reynard tells about how he acquired his treasure. Reynard said, "Once upon a time, my lord and father had found the treasure of King Ermelinik in a hidden place. After my father had found the treasure, he became, in no time at all, so overconfident and so proud that he looked down on all the animals who had earlier been his equals. He had Tibert the cat travel to the Ardennes, that wild region where he met Brune the bear. He wished Brune Godspeed, and he invited him to come to Flanders, and would he like to become king? Brune was glad of this. He had wanted it for a long time. Then he went to Flanders and arrived in Wace, that lovely region, where he met my father. My father sent for reliable Grimbeer and Grey Ysengringe. Tibert the cat was the fifth, and they came to a village called Hijift. Between Hijift and Ghent, they held their council on a dark night. There they gathered through the devil's power and the devil's might, and swore there in the wasteland, all five to the king's death. Now hear a great marvel. They swore on Ysengringe tonsure, all five of them, that they would get Brune on the throne in Aachen, and would make him a mighty king. They also agreed to the following. If any of the king's relatives was to object, my father would, with his silver and with his gold, oppose them to such an extent that they would be disgraced. That I know, and I shall tell you how. One morning, very early, it so happened that my nephew the badger was a little drunk with wine, and he confided in good faith in my wife, Lady Hermeline, and told her all about it, detail by detail, as they were walking on the heath. My wife, who is a special lady, gave Grimbeard her promise that it would remain a secret. As soon as she reached the wood where I was, and she met me, she told it to me at once, but she did it in secret. And she told it with me with such evidence that I was convinced of the truth, that all my hair stood upright for great fear. My heart truly became as cold as ice. So now I'll just kind of summarize the rest of his speech, but he goes on to talk about how his father with the king's lords planned to betray the king with this immense amount of gold they had found, and that Reynard prayed that he would find the treasure to stop the plot. And then one day he happens to see his father come out from a hole, and then he looks into that hole after his father had left, and he sees the treasure in it. So, in order to stop the plot, he rehides the treasure in a new spot. And I'll pick back up on the story now, or on the text now. So it says, Reynard says, "Now hear what those who had betrayed the king did in the meantime." So remember, the treasure is gone. They no longer have the treasure, but they think they have it hidden, right? So he says, "Brune the bear secretly sent his salutation through the land and promised great riches to all who would serve him for pay. He promised to dole out to them silver and gold generously. My father traversed the entire country with the writs from Brunn. Little did he know that the thieves had got to his treasure, of which they had relieved him. If the treasure had not been made away with, he would have been able to buy the entire city of London with it. So much did he profit by all of his running around. When my father had crossed all the land between the Elbe and the Somme in all directions, and had enlisted many a brave soldier with his gold, who would come to his aid once it was summer, my father returned to where he found Brunn and his companions. Then he told them of the great troubles and the many dangers that he had experienced before the high fortresses in the land of Saxony, where the hunters had passed every day with their dogs, which had terrified him many times. All this he said quite casually. Afterwards, my father produced lists that were much to Brunn's liking, which contained 1,200 named relatives of Lord Ysengringe, with sharp claws, with huge maws, quite apart from the cats and the bears, all of whom were in Brunn's pay, and the foxes and the badgers from Thuringia and from Saxony. All of them had sworn that if they were paid 20 days' wages in advance, they would, according to their powers, be sure to obey Brunn's orders. All this I put a stop to, thank God. When my father had delivered his message, he wanted to go and have a look at his treasure, and when he arrived in the same place as where he had left it earlier, the treasure was completely gone, and its whole broken up. What use is it to dwell on it? When my father saw it, he became so miserable and angry that he hanged himself from sheer frustration. And so Brunn's plan came to nothing. So, in short, there was this huge plan, according to Reynaert, to overthrow the king through paying off all these people to, aid in their rebellion or the usurpation. But then, thanks to Reynaert's craftiness and his loyalty to the king, because he re-hid the treasure in a different spot, they weren't able to pay the men, and the plan came to nothing. The king and queen then took Reynaert privately and spoke with him, and the story even mentions that the reason they did this is because they had hoped to profit from this entire matter. So, while in private, they asked to see the treasure, but Reynaert says that he will only do so if he is first declared innocent. And then the king, blinded by his greed, agrees to this. And then Reynaert kind of gives the king these incredible details on where to find the treasure. But he says that he can't go himself. Although the king wants him to go with me, he says, look, Reynaert, come with me and show me. I don't really want to follow your instructions. But Reynaert says that he can't go. The obvious reason why he can't go is because the treasure does not exist. Reynaert just made this entire thing up, right? However, Reynaert gives a pious excuse as to why he can't go. Reynaert says he can't go because he has to deal with his excommunication and go and get a penance from Rome and then go on a pilgrimage. And he even gives us a little story about how he obtained his excommunication when he convinced a monk, like an animal monk, to leave the monastery or to leave a monastery. So not only does he have an excuse for himself to leave, he then says to the king that since he himself is under an excommunication ban, it would be improper for the king to travel with Reynaert, who's under this ban. And the king actually falls for it. He says, yep, you're right. Since you're under this ban, I shouldn't travel with you, and you should go and, set things right, spiritually, and I will go and find the treasure by myself. So Reynaert, he's able to pull off his master plan here. So after their private little meeting, the king goes back out to the court, and he addresses the crowd, and he says, Reynaert has come to our court here and intends, for which I praise God, to mend his ways wholeheartedly. And my lady the queen has taken his part to such an extent that I have become his friend, and he is reconciled with me. And I have given him free the use of his body and his limbs. I proclaim full peace for Reynaert. Once more, I command peace for him, and also a third time, and I order all of you, at the peril of your lives, to honor Reynaert and his wife and his children. Wherever you meet them, whether it be by night or by day, I do not wish to hear any more complaints about Reynaert's actions. Even though he was callous in the past, he intends to better his life. I shall tell you how. Reynaert will early tomorrow morning receive the pilgrim's staff and scrip, and will go to Rome, and from Rome across the sea, and will certainly not return before he has been given complete absolution for all his sins. So you may have noticed in the king's speech here that he doesn't mention anything about the gold. He doesn't mention that, oh yeah, I'm just letting him go free because I want his money. that he says he has, right? He just says, no, he's made amends. We're friends. No one's allowed to say anything against him. I don't want to hear it. He's free to go, and he's actually going to go and be a pilgrim. And that's really all he says. And just FYI, a pilgrim's scrip is like a bag, kind of like a purse that a pilgrim would have that would have some like stuff that he needs for his journey. When the animals hear the king's proclamation freeing and absolving Reynaert, the animals go into like a rage. They start denouncing Reynaert, but then the king basically lets Reynaert deal with them however he wants to. So this is what the story says. Now hear what more he will do to them. Reynaert, who treated them very cruelly, he got them to cut from Bruin's back a piece of skin that was given to him by way of a scrip, 1 foot long and 1 foot broad. Now, Reynaert will be quite ready, provided he had 4 new shoes. Now hear what he will do, how he will obtain those 4 shoes. He whispered to the queen, Lady, I am your pilgrim. Here is my uncle Ysengringe. He has 4 stout shoes. Help me so I can put them on. I shall take your soul into my care. It is a pilgrim's duty to remember in his prayers all the good that was ever done for him. You may benefit your soul by giving me shoes. Have Hersint, my aunt. So Hersint is Ysengringe's wife, who Reynaert either raped or had some sort of extramarital relationship with. He says, have Hersint, my aunt, give 2 of her shoes. You may do this all in decency. She will stay quietly at home. And when he means shoes, what he means is having like their paws like scalped somehow, or like the skin on the bottom of their feet taken off and then given to him. So all these animals have they're basically tortured and have like their feet scraped off to be given to Reynaert. And then he has all these animals also bound up and thrown into prison as well. Reynaert now as a pilgrim is saying his goodbyes, and there's a note that says that the goodbyes were taking a lot longer than Reynaert would have liked. And he asks if he can have Balin the ram and Kuert the hare accompanying him to his house before he makes his pilgrimage. So he's going to stop at his house and then have them or ask them to take care of a few things before he goes on his alleged pilgrimage. So he goes to his house with Balin and Kuert, and then he says, Balin, cousin Ram, you must wait here outside by yourself. I must go into my fortress. Kuert will come in with me. Lord Balin, impress upon him that he offers suitable comfort to Lady Hermeline, his wife, and her little cubs, when I say goodbye to them. Balin said I appeal to him to comfort every one of them. Talking smoothly, Reynaert wheedled and cajoled so much in so many ways that he deceived Kuert into coming into the den with him. But then when he has Kuert in the den with them, Reynaert says that the king has given me this as a sacrificial offering for us. And then Reynaert says, now let us eat of this good fat hare. The cubs ran to the food and started to eat together. They did not in the least regret that Kuert had lost his life. Hermeline, Reynaert's wife, ate of the flesh and drank the blood. Ah, how often did she wish the king well, who, in his generosity, had so delighted the little cubs with a delicious meal. And then Reynaert reveals his plan to his wife that they're going to go into a wilderness. And he says, I can think of a wilderness with high bushes and heather, and where there is no lack of suitable resting places and food. Fowls and partridges live there, and all kinds of small birds. Will you agree, Lady Hermeline, to go there with me? We can live there for 7 years, if we like, walk in the shadow, and do very well there, before we would be found out. If I said more about it, I would not lie. And then he also explains how he promised the king a treasure which he doesn't have, and how they kind of need to leave, or else it's going to be very bad for them. So it is interesting that Reynaert describes this paradisiacal wasteland. So it's kind of juxtaposed, right? So it's called a wasteland, but it's described in almost like paradisiacal terms, where there's all this food that they can eat. However, it's only paradisiacal from the animals, from the fox's perspective. Meanwhile, they're going to be eating all these animals. So a very one-sided view of paradise. Reynaert then talks to Balin, who's waiting outside of his castle or whatever. And Balin's like, hey, what's all that screaming about? I thought I heard Kuert screaming my name. And then he says, no. The scream was because my wife had fainted when I told her about how I'm going to go on this pilgrimage. And then Balin, he's more or less convinced now. And then he tells Balin that he wants to deliver a letter to the king. But he wants Balin to say that Balin wrote the letter on behalf of Reynaert. And then Reynaert plays on his ego and says, if you do this, you're going to gain a lot of favor in the court and from the king. So Balin agrees to take this letter, but the letter doesn't really exist. So what Reynaert does is he gives him his script, so like the bag, and he says that, the letter's in here, just give this to the king, but make sure you do not open it or read it beforehand. So Balin agrees, kind of blinded by praise from the king, or alleged praise from the king that he's going to receive. And then he goes off to give the letter to the king. And then with regards to Kuwer, Reynaert says, oh, don't worry, he's still in there, but he'll come back and meet you later. So when Balin goes off on his journey back to the king, Reynaert and his family leave for the wasteland. So Balin back at the court now, he gives the letter to the king. And then this is what the story says. And now this is Balin speaking. King, you have never heard speak of a better writer than I am. This letter I wrote for him, whatever may befall me. This letter I compose to the best of my ability, thus drawn up and put in writing. Then the king ordered him to give the letter to Botsert, his clerk. He was better at the job than anyone who was present there. Botsert always used to read the letters that arrived at court. Brunhild and he lifted the script from around Balin's neck, who, in his stupidity, had been saying so much that he will soon regret it. Botsert the clerk received the script. Then Reynaert's doing had come to light. As soon as Botsert drew out the head and saw it. Help! What kind of letter is this, Lord King? By my faith, this is Kuwert's head. Ah, woe king, that you ever put so much trust in Reynaert. Then the king and queen could be seen to be sad and angry. The king stood there deeply affected and hung his head. After a long time, he lifted it again and began to raise. The most terrifying sound that any animal was ever heard to make. The animals there were afraid. So in the bag, it's not a letter, it's Kuwert's like bloody head. And the king and queen have now realized that they've been totally duped, and that all these animals were tortured on behalf of Reynaert, and Reynaert was free despite all of his crimes, all because he was able to play on the king's greed, and it came to nothing. The treasure isn't real. He got played. And I'll now read the last bit of the story. The king said, Lord Fairpeel, I have been so terribly misled by a scoundrel that I am beside myself, and I have been trapped by a trick, so that I now have every reason to hate myself and have lost my honor. A false pilgrim robbed me of those who were my friends before, bold Lord Brune and Lord Ysingringe, and makes me very sad at heart that it will cost me my honor and my life, and rightly so. Then Fairpeel spoke again. Where wrong has been done, peace must be sought. The wolf and the bear will be sent for, as will Lady Hyacinth, and they will straightway be compensated for the wrong done to them, and for the distress and the pain they suffered, by offering them the ram Balin, since he has admitted himself that he betrayed Kuwert. He has done wrong, he will pay for it. And next we shall go after Reynaert and catch him, and hang him by the throat without a trial. It's lawful. Then the king answered to this, Well, Lord Fairpeel, if this could be done, then part of the distress that I suffered would be alleviated. Fairpeel said, Lord, certainly I shall go and effect the reconciliation. Then brave Fairpeel went to where he found the captives. I assume that he freed them first. And then he said, You lords, both of you, I will bring you peace and safe conduct. My lord the king greets you, and now deeply regrets the harm that he has done you. He offers to recompense you, if you will agree, whatever anyone else may think. He wants to give you Balin the ram and all Lords Balin relatives from now until doomsday. In the field or in the woods, they will be at your disposal, and you may kill them as much as you like. The king especially wants you to know this, that you may, without committing any crime, harm and torment Reynaert and all of his relatives wherever you can waylay them. These two great liberties does the king wish to bestow upon you today, to be at your free disposal for all eternity. And in connection with this, the mighty king wants you to do homage to him. He will never again knowingly wrong you. This is what the king lion offers you. Accept it, and you will live in his favor. By God, I would certainly recommend it. Ysingringe said to the bear, What do you say, Lord Brune? I prefer lying in the bushes to lying here clapped in irons. let us go to the king and enter into his peace. Moving along with fear appeal, they all ended by making peace all around. So there's a very like a reversal of like some imagery that you see in Isaiah where it says things about how the animals, even the predators and the prey, live in peace. But now we're told that from now until doomsday, all of Lord Balin's relatives can be eaten by the lords who were wrongly accused of treason. So that's the story. That's how Reynaert got away with it. After all of his crimes, after all of his summons, he was able to trick the king and play on people's greed and gluttony and ego in order to get away with it all. Thank you so much for listening.